My wife thought she was the one holding all the cards. She had no idea I'd already seen her hand. Let me back up, because if I jumped straight to the ending, none of it makes sense. My name is Trevor Holt. I'm 47 years old. I've spent the last 18 years running a mid-sized landscaping and property maintenance company out of Barrie, Ontario. The kind of business you build one contract at a time, mostly municipal bids and commercial properties. The kind of work that looks boring on paper, but keeps 100 families paid through the winter. I'm not someone who thinks in dramatic terms. I don't have enemies. I pay my taxes on time. I coach minor hockey on Saturday mornings because my nephew needed a ride and I stayed. Until 2 years ago, I would have told you my marriage was the most stable thing in my life. Not flashy, not the stuff people post about, but real. Colette and I had been together for 11 years, married for 8. She was 43, worked as a financial coordinator at a regional hospital in Barrie, and she was good at her job. Methodical, precise, never rattled. We bought a house on a quiet street in the south end of the city when interest rates still made sense. We had a routine. Thursday nights were Thai takeout from the place on Dunlop Street. Sunday mornings were her reading the Weekend Globe, while I sorted whatever had broken in the garage the week before. We were people who had built something together and mostly took it for granted, the way you take a good furnace for granted until it stops working. I want you to know that about me before the rest of this. I am not a jealous man. I'm not a suspicious man. I've never once in my life gone through someone else's phone, opened someone else's mail, checked a location history. That was not who I was. Keep that in mind. It matters later. The first thing I noticed was the laptop. Colette had always worked from home on Wednesdays, and the laptop was always open on the kitchen table with half a coffee going cold beside it, and her reading glasses pushed up on her head like she'd just remembered something and got up fast. Was her Wednesday picture. That was what Wednesdays looked like for 6 years running. One Wednesday in late February, I came in from the garage around noon to grab water, and the laptop was closed. Not just closed, moved to the corner of the table and turned so the screen faced the wall. She was in the living room on her phone. She heard me come in and walked upstairs to finish the call, and I stood there in the kitchen feeling like I'd walked into the wrong house and couldn't quite figure out which detail was wrong. I got my water. I didn't say anything. Over the next 3 weeks, I noticed more. She changed the password on the laptop. I know because I'd asked to use it one evening when my own was charging, and she hesitated just a half second too long before saying the battery was low and handing me her iPad instead. The iPad had a new password too, and when I mentioned it, she said IT at the hospital had pushed through a new security protocol, mandatory across all devices connected to their network. Made sense. She said it quickly, the way you say something when you've already rehearsed saying it. I told myself I was reading into things. Colette wasn't the kind of person who played games. She was direct to a fault, the person in every room who would rather have an uncomfortable conversation than let something sit. That was one of the things I'd always trusted about her. That directness. So I sat with the discomfort and said nothing, because that's what you do when you've decided to trust someone. Then came the first Sunday in March. I was out back splitting wood. I still heat the garage with a wood stove in winter, old habit, and I could hear her through the kitchen window when the wind was right. Not words, just tone, and the tone was wrong. It was low and careful, and she kept stopping mid-sentence the way you stop when someone cuts you off. She wasn't talking to her sister. She wasn't talking to one of the hospital coordinators about a scheduling issue. There was something intimate in the pauses, something like negotiation. She came back inside and I asked, casual as I could manage, who she'd been talking to. She said it was a colleague named Francine working through some staffing drama on the weekend. Plausible. Francine exists. I've heard the name dozens of times. It was said a little too evenly, like a person who had thought about how they would say it and then said it that way. I let it go. Again, what I couldn't let go of was the Thursday after that, about a week later. I had a site visit cancel on me mid-afternoon and came home 2 hours earlier than expected. Colette was at the dining room table with a folder open in front of her and 3 sheets of paper spread out across the wood. The second she heard the door, she gathered them into a stack, closed the folder over them, and moved it to the counter beside her without looking at me. Hey. She said it with her back still half turned. Didn't think you'd be home yet. Project got pushed. I set my boots down. What are you working on? Just some hospital stuff, benefits review. She turned then, and her face was fine. Normal. The kind of normal that's a little too assembled. Boring as it sounds. I nodded. I made coffee. I didn't push, but I'd caught one word on the edge of the top sheet before she'd moved the folder. Equalization. In Ontario, that's a specific legal word. It's what the Family Law Act calls the process of dividing family property in a divorce. I know that because I had a business partner go through a brutal split 8 years ago, and I sat in on enough dinners where his lawyer explained the process, that the word got lodged somewhere in my memory. Equalization isn't a word that shows up in hospital benefits reviews. That night I lay awake next to her and I didn't sleep much. I went back through the previous 6 weeks the way you replay a game where you know the final score and start seeing all the moments differently. The closed laptop, the new passwords, the calls she took outside, the folder she moved to the counter, the words she didn't want me to see. None of them were proof of anything. All of them pointed the same direction. The next morning, I called my accountant. Kevin Marsh had done our personal and business taxes for 9 years. I trusted him without qualification. I told him I needed to talk, not about taxes, and asked if he knew a good family law attorney. He did. He gave me the name of a woman named Patricia Okafor, 51, a family lawyer in Barrie, who had 30 years of experience and a reputation for being precise and unsentimental. I appreciated unsentimental. I called her that afternoon. I met Patricia the following Tuesday at her office on Bayfield Street. I told her everything, the timeline, the phone behavior, the word on the page, all of it. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she asked me 2 questions. First, was the business registered in my name only or jointly? My name only, I told her. I'd founded it 7 years before Colette and I got together. Second, did I have premarital assets still traceable and documented? Yes. My down payment on the Barrie house, which I'd pulled from a savings account I'd held since my 20s. A small investment account I'd opened before we married and continued contributing to separately. Trevor, Patricia said, setting her pen down. I'm not going to tell you this is definitely heading where you think it's heading, but I will tell you this. If it is, the time to get organized is now, before anything is filed. Not after, before. She walked me through Ontario family law in terms I could follow. Under the Family Property Act, the value of the matrimonial home is split regardless of who owned it before marriage. But other premarital assets, if properly traced and documented, are deductible from the equalization payment. The business, founded before the marriage, would be valued at its current worth and then netted against what it was worth when we married, the difference being what was subject to equalization. If that documentation existed and was clean, it changed everything. It existed. I had receipts going back to the founding. I had the original incorporation documents from 2006. I had a business valuation I'd commissioned for a bank loan application in 2015. I spent the following 2 weeks doing exactly what Patricia told me to do, quietly, methodically. I had an independent business valuator, a man named Conrad Ames who specialized in SMEs in Central Ontario, come in for an assessment. I had Patricia begin the formal paper trail for my premarital assets, the savings contributions, the investment statements going back to before the marriage, the founding documents for the business. Everything notarized, time-stamped, organized into a file that would answer questions before they were asked. I told Colette I was meeting with the accountant about the company's Q1 projections. I told her Conrad was a potential commercial client who wanted to talk about a property contract. Both true in their own way, neither the whole story. Here's what I hadn't told Patricia yet. Here's what I hadn't told anyone. I wasn't just going to protect what was mine. I was going to find out exactly what she thought she was entitled to. And I was going to give her something specific to find. This is the part people sometimes have trouble with. I've thought about it a lot, about whether what I did was fair, and I've landed somewhere I can live with. But I want to explain it properly. I knew Colette. 11 years is a long time to learn someone. I knew how she thought about money, carefully, strategically, always with an eye on the longer picture. It was one of the things I'd admired about her for most of our marriage. She was the one who'd pushed us to max our TFSA contributions every year, who had mapped out a mortgage acceleration plan on a spreadsheet the same month we moved in. She was not impulsive about finances, which meant that if she was planning something, she had done the math. And whatever number she had done the math around, I needed to know what it was. So I built her a number to find. My company has a line of credit through TD Bank, standard for a business our size, used mostly for equipment purchases between contracts. In early April, I requested a credit limit increase. The request came back approved with a letter outlining the new available credit, the terms, and a projected capacity summary that included what the business could theoretically leverage against future contracts under ideal growth conditions. It was a real letter, real bank letterhead, completely legitimate. The numbers in the projected capacity section were forward-looking estimates, the kind of thing the bank generates as standard practice when you're being approved for commercial credit. They were not current balances. They were not assets. They were potential. And out of context, read quickly by someone who was looking for a number and found a big one, they looked like something else entirely. I left the letter in my home office. Not in a locked drawer, not hidden, filed under B for bank correspondence, in a cabinet I'd never once locked in the history of our marriage. The cabinet Colette had gone into dozens of times over the years to find insurance documents or property records without asking. I felt strange doing it. I want to be honest about that. I sat at my desk for a few minutes after I filed it and looked at the cabinet, and thought about the man I thought I was, and whether this was something that man would do. I decided the man I thought I was hadn't been paying close enough attention, and that the man I actually was needed to know what was coming before it arrived. I didn't have to wait long. 5 days later I came home and the cabinet was slightly open. Not much. A few centimeters. I always close it flush because the latch is stiff and you have to push it properly or it doesn't catch. I closed it every time without thinking about it, the way you flip a light switch. It was open. The letter was back in its folder, back under B, but the folder was facing the wrong way. I keep them spine out. This one was spine. Somebody had been in there. What happened next, I would not have predicted even if I'd tried. Over the following week, Colette changed. Subtly, slowly, in ways that I think only someone who'd been paying very close attention would have caught. The tension in her went somewhere. The careful, managed quality she'd been wearing for 2 months. The assembled face, the deliberate answers softened. She started sleeping better. I could tell because I was still sleeping badly, and I would have noticed if she wasn't. She suggested we finally get around to resealing the back deck before summer. She booked a dinner reservation at a place on the water in Oro Medante that we'd been meaning to try for 2 years. On a Saturday afternoon, she wandered through a furniture showroom in Innisfil with a look on her face I recognized from early in our marriage. Relaxed, almost dreamy, the way someone looks when they think they already know how something is going to turn out. She thought she'd found the real number. She didn't know she'd found exactly the number I'd wanted her to find. The organized finances conversations, which had been intensifying over the previous weeks, stopped entirely. She didn't need the inventory anymore. She thought she already had what she needed. Instead, she got purposeful in a different way. Quiet and settled. The kind of settled that comes when someone has made a decision and feels good about it. In the 3rd week of April, she told me she was meeting a friend for dinner on a Wednesday, a woman named Beth from her yoga studio. I said have fun. She came home 2 hours later than expected, a little flushed, in the same good mood she'd been in for 10 days. I didn't ask. I already had Patricia on speed dial, my documentation in order, and a very clear sense of what number was about to appear in a legal document. On a Friday morning in early May, I left for a site assessment at a commercial property in Collingwood. I came home that evening to find an envelope on the kitchen counter with my name written on it in Colette's handwriting. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded in front of her and an expression I hadn't seen before. Composed. Almost formal. The way someone looks when they've rehearsed what comes next enough times to feel ready for it. I think we need to talk. She nodded toward the envelope. I'd like you to read that first. I already knew what it was. Application for divorce under the Divorce Act, filed that afternoon at the Simcoe County Courthouse. Her financial disclosure attached. Her request for equalization payment listed against an asset figure that included, prominently, a projected bank capacity number that did not represent any actual money in any actual account. She had built her entire opening position around a number that had never existed as a balance. I set the papers down on the counter. Okay, I said, we'll let the lawyers handle it. She looked mildly surprised that I wasn't more rattled. She said something about how she didn't want this to be ugly. She said she just wanted a fair outcome. She said she hoped we could be decent to each other through the process. I thought about telling her then. I decided not to. I said goodnight and I called Patricia from the driveway. Patricia's voice when I explained the number Colette had listed in her disclosure went quiet for a moment in a way that told me she understood exactly what had happened. Then she said, Trevor, I need you to walk me through that bank letter one more time. I walked her through it. The number she's claiming, Patricia said carefully, doesn't correspond to anything in your actual financial disclosure. No, I said. It corresponds to a projected capacity estimate in a credit approval letter. A letter she went looking for without my knowledge, and read without my knowledge, and drew her own conclusions, from without ever asking me a single question about it. There was a long pause. Then Patricia said, "I've been doing this for 30 years. I want you to know that what you did was legal. And I want you to know that what happens next is going to be interesting." She had no idea how right she was. The financial disclosure process in Ontario requires both parties to submit Form 13, a complete and sworn record of assets, liabilities, and income. Colette's lawyer, a man named Stephen Reese, 55, had built her entire equalization claim around the inflated number. Stephen was experienced, respected, efficient. He'd done his job well, based on what his client had told him. What his client had told him was wrong. The settlement conference was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the courthouse on Worsley Street. I'd been to that building once before in my life, for a business dispute over a contract, and I remembered the fluorescent light in the hallways and the way sound moved strangely in the stairwell. Colette arrived with Stephen looking prepared. Stephen opened with a clear practice summary of the marital estate as his client understood it, including the business assets, the matrimonial home, and the investment and bank holdings. With the projected figure listed as a confirmed asset, Patricia didn't reach for her folder right away. She waited a beat. Then she said, "I'd like to address the asset figure my colleague has just referenced, because I think there's been a significant misunderstanding, and I'd like to walk through it carefully." She laid it out the way we'd prepared it. The TD Bank letter was real. Here was the original, with the bank's letterhead and the date. Here was the specific section that had been referenced in the disclosure. Projected credit capacity under a 3-year growth scenario. Standard language in any commercial credit approval letter. Clearly labeled as forward-looking estimates in the document's own header. Here was the actual current business valuation, conducted by Conrad Ames in March. Here were the actual business accounts. Here was the actual line of credit balance. The number Colette had listed in her disclosure was not an asset. It had never been an asset. It was a bank's estimate of what Trevor Holt's company might qualify to borrow against in the future, under ideal conditions. A number Trevor Holt had never represented to anyone, verbally, or in writing, as a current balance. Mr. Holt placed no document in evidence, Patricia said. He made no claim. If someone reviewed private correspondence without his knowledge and formed an incorrect conclusion from standard bank language, that is not a marital asset misrepresentation. That is a misreading. I watched Colette's face across the table. It happened in stages. The first stage was around her eyes, a slight tightening around her eyes, like something didn't add up and she was running the numbers again. The second stage was a look she shot at Stephen that I'd never seen her direct at anyone before. Something between accusation and panic. The third stage was a stillness that settled over her face like a curtain coming down. "That's not right," she said, low and controlled. The letter said. It said projected. Patricia said, sliding the document across the table. "I've marked the relevant language. Would you like to review it?" Stephen pulled it toward himself, and I watched his jaw work as he read. He was a professional. His face didn't give much away, but he reached for his water glass and took a careful sip, which I suspect was not about thirst. He asked for a 20-minute recess. When they came back, the tone in the room was completely different. The number didn't come up again. The business valuations discussion reset to Conrad's actual figures. The equalization calculation that Stephen put on the table after the recess was a number I recognized. The one Patricia had projected months ago based on the real assets, the premarital deductions, the documented timelines. Close to exactly what Ontario family law would have required without any of the performance we just sat through. Colette left that conference without saying anything to me. I watched her walk out ahead of Stephen into the hallway, and I had a strange feeling that was not satisfaction. It was something quieter than that. Tired, maybe. The way you feel when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time, and you've finally been allowed to set it down. That evening, the calls started. The first few were quiet, almost confused. She called 3 times between 8 and 10 o'clock, and left messages that didn't quite form complete sentences. Something about how she didn't understand what happened, something about wanting to talk. The fourth call, just after 11, was different. Her voice was hard and she called what I'd done manipulative. She said I'd set a trap. She said she was going to contest the business valuation. I didn't call back. Patricia had told me not to engage, and for the first time in a long time, silence was the easiest thing I'd ever chosen. 2 weeks later, I got a text from a man named Patrick Dufour, 44, who ran a property management firm in Barrie and moved in some of the same professional circles I did. We weren't close, the kind of acquaintance you see at Chamber of Commerce events and exchange genuine but brief conversations with. He asked if we could meet for coffee. He said it was something I should probably know about. We met at a place on Dunlop Street on a Tuesday morning. He put his phone on the table and slid it across to me without much preamble. I debated whether to show you this, he said. I landed on yes. It was a message thread between Colette and a man named Aaron Gould who, Patrick explained, worked in wealth management in Toronto and had been introduced to Colette through a mutual connection about 6 months ago. Patrick knew Aaron through that same connection and had become increasingly uneasy about what he'd seen passing through their group over the previous few months. The messages went back 5 months. They started before the laptop was closed, before the passwords changed, before any of it. Aaron and Colette had been in contact since November, and the early messages were what you'd expect: cautious, slightly formal, the getting-to-know-you cadence of two people carefully feeling out what they were to each other. By January, that had changed. By January, it was something else entirely. There were messages about her timeline, about when she planned to file, about what she expected the settlement to look like. One message from February, dated the same week she'd moved the folder to the counter, read, "The number is bigger than I thought. I need a few more weeks to confirm it, but it changes what we can do." His response, "Don't rush it, do it right. Don't rush it, do it right." Like they were planning a renovation. Like the life we had built together was a budget they were reviewing line by line to see what they could repurpose. There was a message from the day after the settlement conference. Colette to Aaron. It collapsed. The number wasn't real. He sent her something complicated. Said he was sorry. Said the timing was just off. Said maybe in a few months things would look different. 3 days later, Colette sent him another message. He didn't respond. She sent a third message 5 days after that. A question mark. Nothing. I handed the phone back to Patrick and thanked him. He said he was sorry to be the one to bring it. I told him he'd done the right thing and I meant it. The messages didn't stay entirely private. Patrick hadn't shared them beyond me, but Aaron apparently had less discretion in what he'd said to people in their shared circle over the previous months, and the version of events that had been circulating among certain people in Barrie, that Trevor Holt had somehow deceived his wife and hidden business assets, fell apart quickly once the actual sequence became clearer. Her brother Greg, who had sent me a clipped, pointed text in May saying he thought what I'd done was wrong, called me in June. He said he didn't have the full picture when he reached out. He said he was sorry. I told him I understood. I meant that too. The divorce was finalized in early July, 4.5 months from the envelope on the kitchen counter. I kept the house. I bought out Colette's share using a line of credit against the business, which Patricia had arranged cleanly and legally. I kept what was legitimately mine, fully documented, fully traced, untouched by a number that was never real. Colette received the equalization payment that Ontario law entitled her to. Nothing constructed around a projection she'd found in a cabinet I'd never once locked in 8 years of marriage. I won't pretend there isn't something strange and heavy about the end of 11 years. There is. I think about the version of our life that used to feel permanent. The Thai takeout on Thursdays, the Sunday mornings with the Globe, the furnace that worked so well we never thought about it. I don't know exactly when that version stopped existing. I suspect it stopped before I noticed. My older sister Janet drove up from Hamilton the first weekend of August with a carload of things I hadn't asked for. New dish towels, a plant I was instructed not to kill, a very firm opinion about the listing furniture. She rearranged 3 things in the kitchen without asking and declared the energy in the house improvable but workable. I told her she sounded like a real estate staging guide. She told me I looked like a man who needed to eat something that wasn't frozen. She wasn't wrong on either count. The house feels like mine again. Not the provisional mine of the previous 6 months, when I was moving through rooms I half expected to lose. Just mine, quiet in a good way. The kind of quiet that comes from knowing exactly what's in every drawer and cabinet, and not being afraid of who might be reading it. People have asked me since whether I feel bad about the letter, whether it was fair. I've sat with that question long enough to know where I land. I never told Colette that letter represented a current balance. I never showed it to her. I never mentioned the account. I filed a piece of bank correspondence in a cabinet I'd never locked, in a house we both lived in, and she made a choice to look through my private papers without asking, draw a conclusion without verifying it, hand that conclusion to a lawyer, and build a legal claim around a number she had never once asked me about. She wasn't misled by a trap. She was undone by the certainty that she already knew what she was going to find, and by the hunger that made her stop looking once the number was big enough. I think about that Sunday in March sometimes. The wood splitting, the wind carrying her voice through the kitchen window, the pauses in the conversation that I couldn't hear but could feel. I was already losing something I didn't have a name for yet, and the morning felt ordinary, and the garage smelled like sawdust, and I had no idea how much I was about to have to pay attention. I paid attention. That's the whole of it, really. That turned out to be enough.